We need to raise awareness about child abuse in the United States. It's a concern. Certainly, we're all aware of it, but how do we raise it with our patients? How do we deal with this issue? I'm Dr. Brian McDonough. I'm your host for Primary Care Today, and today my guest is Joe Klest. Joe Klest is the author of The Whole Truth, and he's a Chicago native. He's a highly respected lawyer. For years, he's been a person who has been a hope for victims of sexual abuse. He obtained some of the largest civil sexual abuse verdicts in our country's history. But more importantly, he's counseled thousands of victims and handled over 500 sexual abuse cases against both individuals and institutions. First of all, I know you wrote the book, and I know you deal with this a lot. My first question for you is just how do you deal with this? It's got to be emotional each and every time.
It is, but, I'm actually very good with the clients. I mean, I console them and make them feel comfortable with the process. And they appreciate that. It's because I really take it at their own pace, and nothing happens that they don't want to happen. So it's really I handle these cases so it's totally under their control, and I don't take any steps without their permission.
We have a unique audience. It's a physician audience who listens to this program, so you have an opportunity to maybe be talking to physicians who deal with patients. I practice in Pennsylvania and Delaware. I also have a license in South Carolina. So because of multiple licenses, I'm often in CME programs that we're told to do, and literally told to do because we should learn about them. And one of the issues that's come up now in Delaware and in Pennsylvania is child abuse, and actually taking courses where we learn about the signs of child abuse, what we should look for. It's clearly an issue that's important if they're training physicians for it. From your perspective and firsthand perspective, what are the things doctors should be looking for as warning signs when patients come to their office?
Are you talking about minor patients?
Well, initially minor patients, yeah.
Well, often they don't sleep. They cry through the night. Some of them are somewhat sexualized in the way they respond to other people. It's, primarily post-traumatic stress disorders. So if you know the symptoms of that, that's what you're looking for.
Right. And now for a doctor in the office, we are trained to ask specific questions. But if you don't see bruises, you don't see other things, you may not ask those questions. From your perspective, from the hundreds of patients you've dealt with in various aspects and following them from your legal perspective, are there things we should be looking for or asking about with every patient, or should we just kind of, when we get our spidey senses tingling, then ask?
I would actually ask every single patient. Is anybody touching you in ways that make you uncomfortable? Something soft like that. Right.
Kind of bring it up in that way. And it's interesting. What I do, well, first of all, we always have a chaperone in the room with us, which is one of our policies. I train residents, and not only is it legally smart, it's smart from a standpoint of your own protection as a physician, but you have someone in there. But what I will say is, now I'm going to check you, and I'm going to look at you, nothing that's going to hurt or whatever. I'm just going to take a look. But I want you to know, people, except maybe mom or dad, who's changing you or whatever, no one should be doing that. Has anybody done that to you? I say it right in front of the parents because It gives them an opportunity to answer. And then, and then I will say, has anybody touched you inappropriately or, and you don't have to let anybody do that. And then I make a big, almost grandstanding performance in front of the parents and say, you should always tell your parents, no matter what anybody says, that if they did something, don't be afraid to talk to them. Always talk to them about this for the rest of your life. And I try to say that, and then I turn to the parents and say, make sure you keep drilling that message home. Now, that's my approach. Is that effective, or is that what you would?
No, that's a brilliant approach. It's the exact perfect approach. Kids are not very good liars, and so if they lie about it, you can tell they look away, all the tells that other people have. Kids are in spades. And they get very uncomfortable because they don't know how to make up a lie real fast. So you get some responses that way. The thing that you said that I thought was most significant is that you always have someone else in the room. And that one of the problems that we have now is that, I don't know if you saw this part in the forward to the book, but 10% of all public school students are sexually abused by someone in the school system.
Wow.
And they don't have a process. Like the Catholic Church now has a very good process to protect this. They have the Veritas program where they make sure that somebody's in the room and they know how to find the signs. But the public schools don't have a system, and one of the reasons they don't have a system is because they have immunity from lawsuits for negligence. So they have no incentive to change their behavior. I have a case now where a teacher was having sex with a 13-year-old girl for 2 years, told 2 teachers, and actually showed a third teacher of a videotape of him having sex with this girl. And nobody reported it. He continued to have sex with her.
Yeah, you're surprised. I mean, I know not that it's far removed from when she's there. I have a daughter at Penn State, and obviously that culture is still impacted by what happened 6-10 years ago, but they still talk about it, and they've tried to turn the corner, and they've tried to take that issue with Sandusky and turn it into a positive, if in fact you can. But still, you look at it and go, like, how could that have continued for so long in such an environment? Why didn't people speak up?
Well, it's because nobody spoke up just because they were protecting their institution. That's what institutions do. That happened, people talk about this like it's a Catholic Church problem. Every other institution dealt with it exactly the same way, no difference, and you don't even hear about it. Like for example, the Spotlight team that exposed the Catholic Church in Boston in 2002. They just announced this year that they're starting to investigate private schools, non-Catholic private schools. Well, why didn't they do that 10 years ago?
Sure.
You got 10 years of many kids who could have been saved otherwise. And nobody's investigating the public schools because, the way this got out is, going back to the Catholic Church 20 years ago or whatever, 25 years ago, if some kid or even an adult said, I was molested by Father so-and-so, that wouldn't hit the press because the press, they get sued. But if a lawsuit's filed, the press can always say a lawsuit was filed alleging that. So that's why you know about it in the Catholic Church, is because lawsuits were being filed. Well, if you can't sue the public schools, nobody's going to print about it unless somebody gets arrested, and then they can say someone was arrested. But I really think that what needs to happen is the immunity needs to be lifted for public schools for this particular issue, and also for bullying.
Mm-hmm. No, I see what you're saying because, well, it's interesting. In part of the courses that I've taken, is all the doctors take in Pennsylvania, one of the things I saw where they said was that in schools now, at least in Pennsylvania, in schools, you actually are responsible for any kind of abuse, and you can be taken to court for that. Now, on surface, that makes a lot of sense and it's good. But the other side of the coin is, will that maybe stop people from speaking out and making a comment about another teacher or whatever?
It's kind of varies state by state, but in Illinois, teachers are mandatory reporters. For example, those 2 teachers I told you about that knew about this guy having sex, or 3 teachers, they were all arrested and charged with failure to report. So they have a legal obligation, potential criminal prosecution.
And that's what we have as physicians. We have a legal mandate to report, which is an important thing, because at least even if you're protected in the sense that you report, and if you're wrong, and God, you would hope you would be wrong, you at least have said and done what you're supposed to do. By the way, you're listening to Primary Care today on ReachMD. I'm your host, Dr. Brian McDonough, and my guest today, very interesting conversation, it's just flying by, is Joe Klest. He is the author of The Whole Truth. We're talking about abuse, how the legal system handles it, how we should as physicians handle it. It's a touchy subject, but it's clearly an important one to talk about. What about judges? My experience, and I have obviously limited experience with the judicial system, but it seems like wherever you are, whatever hamlet you're in, judges rule with this incredible power. And again, I'm a physician looking at evidence and studies, and judges say, well, this is the law, and this is this, and this is that. And I go, well, that's one person's opinion, and now you're saying that's everything. They can kind of skew a hearing the way they want it to be. They can make something the way they want it to be. They could intimidate somebody who wants to report something. Have you seen that from your role as a lawyer, that judges can kind of get in the way of what's best for the individual?
I would have to say it depends on the judge. There's kind of been, and this really comes out of doctors, so I'm kind of touching a sore spot here. But the Republican Party has been banging on tort law for the last 25 years, and it's mainly medical malpractice cases, but it bleeds over into other cases because they're saying, well, tort lawyers are liberals, so you get in a conservative district, and a judge is going to be very difficult on you. I had a judge in a very conservative county, which is DuPage County, it's suburban Chicago, and he threw out a case where this guy molested his daughter a bunch of times. And it was clear to me that he just doesn't like tort law. Well, what people don't realize is tort law is used to change society. I mean, we don't want to ruin our cars, but we're also very careful about not getting in car accidents because we don't want to hurt somebody and get sued. That's honestly why I feel so good about this type of practice. I mean, it's tort lawyers that changed the Catholic Church, that brought this issue to the forefront. So it's a big deterrent.
So there's obviously sometimes you use the term you throw the baby out with the bathwater, but you essentially you might look at one example and say let's stop this, but all the other good things that can happen don't happen.
That's right. That's right. I agree.
Now you are obviously someone who is passionate about this. You wrote a book. You're trying to get word out. What's your interest? What got you so interested in this aspect of law, and in particular the whole child abuse issue?
Well, it was kind of some interesting coincidences. I mean, I don't believe in psychic stuff, but it all came together in kind of an interesting way. My guy I office with, he actually wrote a book about the attorney who defended John Wayne Gacy. We were just office mates, and he got this call from a boy who had been molested by a priest. And he said, I do mainly criminal stuff. Do you want to talk to this kid? So I did. And, I started to investigate it. Back then, you had to use the periodical guide to look stuff up. So I was looking for articles on it, and I happened across a Time magazine article that had just come out, in a month or two. And it was about a story about a woman in Chicago by the name of Jeannie Miller, whose son was molested by a priest, and how she kind of raised the riot act about it. Well, I found her. I called her up, and she said, I'm very interested in talking to you. And by the way, I'm starting a support group for victims, and the first meeting is this Sunday at my house. Here's my address. Come.
Wow.
At this meeting were some of the big players in this whole issue. There's a priest by the name of Father Tom Doyle. He wrote the foreword to my book. He's very famous in this area because in 1985, he was the canon lawyer to the Vatican Embassy, and he was instructed by the Vatican to go monitor a pre-sex abuse trial in Louisiana. So he started looking into this issue and saw that it was a huge potential problem, and he predicted everything that happened about the church getting sued over and over again.
Wow. And
in 1985, he wrote a paper and passed it on to all the bishops, and they pretty much ignored him. So he's become a plaintiff's advocate. He testifies on behalf of the victims now. And he was at that meeting, and a couple other people who were heavily involved in other victims' organizations. So it all kind of fell together in a very, very interesting sort of a way.
That's very interesting. I will tell you a story. My father was in the candy business, and he worked with the Catholic Church, and we had priests stay at our house weekend after weekend. I never had an issue. We always had guests over, and I said to my dad when this all started, to shake out, and then my dad's passed away, but at the time, there was never any issues. What do you think? And he goes, well, first of all, most people are good. He goes, but, when you're raising your own kids, don't trust anybody. Be around, be present, be a father who's there. And odds are very strong that nothing's going to happen because you are there. And that one of the big things I often tell my patients is be present in your child's life if you can. Be at the Little League field, be at the basketball game, whatever it is, be at the theater. Just be there because that often can be a deterrent. Does that work, or is that?
Your dad gave you brilliant advice. Very smart man and very insightful. It's not something people would have thought about back then.
Well, back then, even in the Catholic Church, to even talk about that issue openly at that time was not an issue that that generation would have talked about. You're right. And we were more aware of it now. I want to ask you one last question. What didn't I bring up that you thought we should have talked about?
I just have to kind of reiterate that I think the most important thing is to eliminate immunity from public institutions.
Okay, that's great.
Right.
Joe Klest, I want to thank you. You are the author of a book called The Whole Truth. If you're listening to this interview and you found it interesting, read The Whole Truth. You'll get The Whole Truth and a lot more information on this subject. I'm Dr. Brian McDonough. If you missed any of this discussion, please visit reachmd.com/primary care today. You can download the podcast. You can learn more on the series. I want to thank you for listening, and I want to thank you very much, Joe, for joining us. It was a pleasure having you on.
Thank you, Doctor. It was a great show.